The restaurant sat on the edge of Lake Union, its glass walls catching the late afternoon sun like mirrors made of memory. It was a place I had always liked, the kind of place that reminded me of work, of days when I'd bring blueprints to clients and leave with my hands smelling faintly of cedar and steel. Today, though, the smell was of lemon butter and grilled salmon. A soft hum of voices, clinking cutlery, and the occasional laughter of strangers filled the air. My daughter Amelia had picked the spot. She said it had a good view, a view for a birthday, she'd said, smiling the way people do when they've rehearsed it in the mirror first. I was 71 years old that day. A retired construction engineer. Still strong enough to carry my own groceries, but old enough that people whispered the word safety around me as if it were a curse. And still, somehow, still paying for my own cake. That made me smile. A small one, the kind that hides behind politeness. The waiter poured my coffee and turned away. Behind him, the lake shimmered, sunlight scattered across it like small coins dropped by invisible hands. It looked peaceful, calm, untouched. Amelia laughed softly at something her husband, Mark, said. But her laughter had a stiffness to it, the kind that sounds happy from a distance but collapses when you get too close. Mark scrolled through his phone, half listening, the way men do when their minds are elsewhere. I nodded at their words, offered small, safe answers. That's what happens when your own child becomes a guest in your life. You learn to speak in short, harmless sentences. We talked about the kids. About a vacation they couldn't afford. About house repairs that would just never end. I smiled when expected, stirred my coffee twice, the way I always did. Then, just as the waiter brought the dessert tray, I heard it. A whisper. Quiet, quick, meant to slip under the noise of cutlery and conversation. But I heard it. I've always been good at hearing things no one else does. Years on construction sites teach you that, the faint crack in a beam before it breaks, the soft hum of pressure before the valve bursts. Amelia leaned closer to Mark, her lips barely moving. While I distract him, go change the locks. My hand froze on the coffee cup handle. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd misheard. My ears weren't what they used to be, after all. But then I saw her eyes, quick, flicking toward me, measuring my silence. The hum of the restaurant faded into a long, hollow sound. Only the soft hum of the lake outside remained. She started talking again, smiling too brightly. Dad, you should come stay with us for a while. That big house must feel so lonely these days. She said it sweetly, like an invitation. But I knew what it was, a test. A probe. Her tone carried the same weight as an engineer's hammer tapping concrete, listening for weakness. I didn't flinch. Didn't blink. I kept my face still, the same calm mask I'd worn for decades. It was the same face I used when I explained load-bearing walls to impatient clients. The kind that doesn't move even when everything beneath it shifts. Inside me, though, something heavy turned, slow, deliberate, like gears grinding after years of disuse. Mark stood up. Said he needed to make a call. He left through the glass door, his reflection bending in the sunlight like a man walking into another life. Amelia reached for my hand across the table. Dad, she said softly, you know we just want you safe. That house is old. Anything could happen. Her fingers were warm, gentle, and false. There's a kind of affection that isn't love, only strategy. The waiter arrived again, this time with the cake. Small. 2 candles. 7 and 1. They flickered like tiny warning lights. Amelia started singing before the plate even hit the table. Her voice trembled, just slightly, as if she was trying to time her notes with something unseen. She kept glancing toward the door. Waiting. Mark returned 50 minutes later. His face was pale, his shirt clinging to his chest in small wet patches. He looked like a man who had run, or a man who had just seen a ghost. Something went wrong, he said. Amelia turned, eyes wide. What do you mean? He looked at me, then away. Someone's there, he said quietly. The papers, they're signed. The house is sold. The silence that followed stretched longer than any bridge I'd ever built. Amelia's lips parted, not to speak, but to breathe. Her hand slipped from mine, landing softly on the table. The air between us thickened. Even the lake outside seemed to pause. The waiter came to clear the cake plate, oblivious to the collapse unfolding between us. The soft sound of ceramic on wood felt louder than thunder. I took a sip of coffee. The steam fogged my glasses. "Yes," I said. "I sold it 3 weeks ago." I looked out at the water again. It was calm like a secret that had already been told. "I built that place once," I said quietly. "Now I'm building peace." The rest of the meal was wordless. Amelia's hands trembled slightly when she lifted her glass. Mark didn't touch his food. The candles had burned out, leaving small rivers of wax that looked like white scars on the plate. They didn't ask who I sold the house to. They didn't need to. The papers were legal, notarized, sealed tighter than their smiles. Outside, the light began to fade, turning the lake a deep blue. The kind of blue that hides things. When we finally left, I offered Amelia my arm. "Old habits." She hesitated before taking it. Her fingers felt colder than mine. As we reached the car, she said quietly, "You could have told me." I smiled faintly. And ruined the surprise. She didn't laugh. Mark avoided my eyes entirely, pretending to be busy unlocking the doors. They drove off in silence, red tail lights shrinking into the city haze. I stood there for a moment, the air sharp and still. Then I turned and walked toward the lake. The reflection of the restaurant shimmered on the water's surface, fractured and incomplete. Like family, I thought. Beautiful from a distance, broken up close. That night, I sat by the window of my apartment, the one overlooking the same lake. I could see their house in my mind, the one I'd built plank by plank. I knew every nail, every joint, every creak in the floorboards. And I knew it no longer belonged to me. Or to them. The revenge wasn't about money. It wasn't even about betrayal. It was about reclaiming the one thing they had tried to take without asking: choice. The house was more than wood and nails. It was my story. And that story, I decided, would end on my terms. In the faint reflection of the glass, I saw myself again. Older. Smaller. But not broken. The world outside was quiet. The water calm. And in that stillness, I whispered to no one. The strongest walls aren't built from concrete. They're built from letting go. Then I turned off the light. And for the first time in years, I slept without dreaming of the house. When I first bought that land in Maple Valley, it was nothing but wet earth and tall grass. The kind of land no one wanted. Too soft for machines, too quiet for ambition. But I didn't need ambition. I needed purpose. It had rained that morning. The ground was still slick, and when I stepped off the truck, the mud swallowed my boots like the earth itself wanted to keep me. The air smelled of pine and damp soil, that clean kind of loneliness that only fresh land knows. I remember holding the deed in one hand and my daughter, Amelia, in the other. She was 3 then, small enough to balance on my arm, yet already full of questions. "Daddy, when will Mommy come back from the hospital?" Her voice was soft. Hopeful. The kind of question you wish a child would never learn how to ask. I told her what people say when they can't bear the truth. "Someday, sweetheart. Someday soon." She nodded, trusting me completely, because back then, she still believed I could fix everything. The way a child believes her father can fix toys, broken fences, and the world. That night, after she fell asleep in the truck, I sat under the half-built sky, a thermos of coffee beside me, and drew on the back of old blueprints from work. I wasn't designing a mansion. I wasn't even designing comfort. I was designing a promise, that no storm, no loss, no silence would ever take us down again. The house began with a foundation of memory. I laid the first boards by hand, uneven, rough, but mine. Every nail was borrowed from a friend. Every tool carried someone else's story. By day, I worked full-time for the firm, long hours, dusty boots, concrete dust in my lungs. By night, I built home. On good days, Amelia sat beside me, her little plastic dolls lined up on a plank of wood as she pretended to be my supervisor. "You missed a spot, Daddy," she'd say, pointing at a screw with her crayon. "That's not safe for my dollhouse." "Ilaug. Then I better fix it, Her laughter, that high, bell-clear sound, would echo through the empty frame of the house like sunlight filling dark corners. That sound built the walls stronger than any beam could. When I finished her room, I painted it sky blue. She wanted stars on the ceiling, so I used a sponge dipped in white paint and let her help me dab them on. They looked messy, uneven and smudged, but she said it was perfect. "Now Mommy can see me when she looks down," she whispered one night. And I didn't have the heart to tell her that heaven wasn't that close. Years passed, and that house became more than wood and nails. It was a timeline. Every scratch on the doorframe marked a year. Every repair told a story. The winters were harsh back then. The pipes froze more often than they worked. I'd stay up late with a blowtorch, thawing them out while Amelia sat bundled in blankets near the stove, reading. She liked stories about faraway places, cities with tall towers and trains that never stopped. "One day, I'll live in a city, Daddy. Somewhere bright." "You'll always have a room here," I told her. She smiled, half believing it. Children think forever is real until it ends. By the time she was in high school, the house was solid. The roof no longer leaked. The beams no longer creaked. And I had grown old enough to feel every nail I'd ever hammered. But I didn't mind. The pain was a kind of proof, the good kind. I'd sit on the porch most evenings, coffee in hand, watching the sunset over the pine line. That's where her mother and I used to sit before everything went wrong. That's where we decided to build the house. That's where she said, "Don't make it too big. We don't need space, just love." And I remember smiling, thinking love was enough. I was wrong. By the time Amelia left for college, the town had started to change. Coffee shops appeared where forests once stood. The old road got paved. Developers moved in, the kind who measure dreams in square footage and profit. Suddenly, my handmade house looked quaint instead of proud. Neighbors built glass-front homes with smart systems and imported stone. Mine looked smaller every year, though it hadn't shrunk. But I still kept it clean, strong, alive. I fixed every hinge, every gutter. I kept the firewood dry. When Amelia came home for Christmas, she said, "Dad, this place looks like it's from another time." "That's because it is," I said, smiling. She didn't laugh. A few years later, she married Mark, a man with a handshake too smooth and a smile too practiced. He sold insurance and the illusion of control. I gave them my blessing because fathers are supposed to. Even when their gut twists. They moved to a new suburb, shiny and predictable. But they still visited, sometimes. Always bringing opinions with the dessert. "You should refinance, Dad," Mark said one summer afternoon. "You're sitting on a gold mine." "I'm sitting on my home," I replied. "You could upgrade. Bigger kitchen, better security. We could help manage it." Amelia nodded. "It's just that you're alone out here. What if something happens?" It was love, or at least it sounded like it. Until they started saying we instead of you. We should replace that roof. We need to think about the future. We don't want to lose what's ours. Ours. That word stayed with me. I stopped inviting them over for dinner. Not because I stopped loving them, but because I couldn't stand the way they looked at the walls. Not with nostalgia, but with valuation. One rainy evening, I went to drop off a toolbox Mark had borrowed and forgotten to return. The porch light was on. I was halfway up the steps when I heard voices through the half-open window. "He won't live forever, Mark," Amelia said quietly. "We have to be smart." A pause. Then his voice. "Make it sound like it's for his safety. You're his daughter. He'll believe you." The rain soaked through my jacket as I stood there, listening. I should have been angry. But I wasn't. What I felt was colder. Understanding. That's the moment I stopped being her father and became her project. That night, I sat at my kitchen table. The old blueprints were still rolled up in a tube by the window, yellowed, brittle. I unrolled them, flattening the edges with my palms. I stared at the lines I'd drawn 40 years ago. The layout. The beams. The foundation. Every inch of that house was built by hand, by my hands. And yet, I realized, it was never truly mine anymore. Love had turned into ownership. Care had turned into control. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't just protect my house. I had to protect myself. So I made a plan. Not rushed. Not cruel. Measured. The way an engineer designs a bridge, steady and deliberate. The next morning at 8:15 a.m., I called my lawyer. I need to make some changes, I said. He didn't ask why. He didn't need to. Men like him can hear the weight in silence. For the next few weeks, I met with notaries, signed papers, opened new accounts, transferred assets quietly. Every step was clean, legal, final. Then, I sold the house. To a young couple. They were expecting their first child. When they asked me why I was selling such a beautiful place, I said, because it deserves laughter again. And I meant it. On the day I handed over the keys, I walked through the rooms one last time. The walls still smelled faintly of pine and memory. I stopped by Amelia's old room, the blue paint faded, the white stars almost gone. I stood there for a long time, tracing the marks on the doorframe where I used to record her height every year. Each line was a year of love. Each inch, a piece of me. Then I locked the door, pocketed the key, and walked away. Outside, the rain had stopped. The driveway glistened under a soft light. I took one last look at the roof, the one she said wouldn't last forever. It was still standing. So was I. I thought of her words that day on the porch. Neither do fathers. She was right. But some fathers don't die. They just decide when to stop being used. That evening, I sat by the lake, the same lake where years later we'd celebrate that fateful birthday. The surface shimmered with ripples, each one like a memory floating away. I had no regrets. Only lessons. And one truth carved deep as concrete. Sometimes, the only way to keep what's yours is to let it go first. The King County Courthouse smelled of polished wood and old paper. The kind of smell that clings to places where truth has to fight to be heard. I arrived early. Not because I was nervous, but because builders show up early, it's in the bones. Mr. Richards, my lawyer, was already there. He was in his 60s, grey hair neatly parted, his briefcase more worn than his suit. He greeted me with the kind of nod only old professionals give. Quiet, measured, unspoken respect. You sure you're ready for this, Mr. Harlan? I've been ready since the day I built that house, I said. He smiled faintly. Then let's remind them who you are. When the courtroom doors opened, I saw Amelia and Mark sitting together. She looked smaller than I remembered, like the weight of guilt had made her shrink inside her clothes. Mark, on the other hand, wore arrogance like cologne. He adjusted his tie, whispered something in her ear, and smiled the way salesmen smile before a deal they think is already done. Their attorney, a young man with expensive shoes and the confidence of inexperience, nodded toward me, then began arranging his papers like a magician preparing for a trick. The bailiff called the case. And the judge, an older woman with eyes like steel through glass, took her seat. Case number 17 to 409, the clerk read. Petition for temporary guardianship of Mr. Edward Harlan. The word guardianship echoed in my chest like a bad memory. The idea that my own daughter had filed legal papers to take control of my life. My finances, my freedom, my dignity, felt heavier than any hammer I'd ever held. Still, I kept my face still. Engineers don't panic when the ground shakes. We measure, we assess, we endure. The opposing lawyer rose first, buttoning his jacket. His voice was smooth, practiced, almost kind. Your Honor, my clients are here out of love and concern. Mr. Harlan has exhibited erratic financial behavior. He sold his primary residence of 40 years without notice, transferred funds to unknown accounts, and refuses communication with his family. These are clear signs of cognitive decline, possibly the onset of dementia. He paused, letting the word dementia hang in the air like smoke. We are requesting temporary guardianship so his daughter, Amelia, can ensure his safety and financial stability. This is not an act of greed, Your Honor, it's an act of love. He sat down, confident. Mark gave him a subtle nod. Amelia looked down, avoiding my gaze. Mr. Richards stood slowly, like a man who knew he didn't need to shout to be heard. He walked to the center of the courtroom, his shoes barely making a sound. He opened his briefcase, pulled out a stack of documents, and placed them on the judge's desk one by one. "Your Honor," he began calmly, "love doesn't require power of attorney. It requires trust. And what my client has been denied is exactly that." He handed over the notarized property sale records, the verified bank transfers, the notarized letter of mental fitness signed by a licensed psychiatrist, copies of my will, updated and filed correctly 3 months before. He turned back to the judge. "Mr. Harlan is 71 years old, not 71 years incapable. He is a retired structural engineer who spent 4 decades designing homes and public buildings that still stand today. He has not mismanaged his funds, he has protected them. The petitioners claim to act in his interest, yet all evidence shows they act in pursuit of control." He paused, a craftsman admiring his own precision. "The question before this court is not whether Mr. Harlan is old. It is whether being old means you must surrender your independence to those who mistake inheritance for entitlement." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Even the judge's expression softened. Then Richards looked at me. "Your Honor, Mr. Harlan would like to say a few words." I stood. My knees protested, but my voice didn't. "Your Honor," I began, "I built my home by hand. Not for profit, not for comfort, but for love. I raised my daughter there. I buried her mother's ashes beneath the maple tree out front. That house was the story of my life. But over time, I realized love can turn into something dangerous when it forgets respect." I looked at Amelia then. She tried to meet my eyes, but couldn't. "I overheard conversations," I continued. "Plans made in my name, decisions made without me. So I sold the house, legally, willingly, and with a clear mind. I did it not out of confusion, but out of clarity. Because I would rather be poor and free than rich and owned." Silence. The kind that fills every corner and makes everyone hold their breath. "I am not confused," I said finally. "I am disappointed. And I'm here today not to fight my daughter, but to defend the man she seems to have forgotten I am." For a moment, the room seemed to freeze. Then the judge leaned forward, her hands folded. "Mr. Richards," she said, "these documents check out." "Yes, Your Honor. Every signature verified, every transfer traceable. And the psychiatric evaluation. Filed under seal. Certified clear." The judge nodded slowly, tapping her pen once against the file. "In my 30 years on the bench," she said, "I have seen children save parents, and I have seen parents save children from themselves. This is the latter." She looked at Amelia. "Mrs. Warner, do you understand the gravity of accusing a competent parent of incapacity? This court is not a weapon for family disputes." Amelia's lips trembled. I only wanted to protect him." "Then respect his choices," the judge said. "That's the truest form of protection." The gavel came down, one sharp strike that sounded like the closing of a door. "Petition denied." The words echoed like thunder. Mark exhaled sharply, muttering under his breath. Amelia just sat there, tears forming but refusing to fall. Mr. Richards closed his briefcase with quiet satisfaction and whispered, "That's the sound of a bridge not burning, just closing." Outside the courthouse, the air was cold and damp. The city hummed around us, indifferent to our small dramas. Amelia and Mark stood by the steps. I thought they might leave quietly, but Amelia called out, "Dad, please wait." I stopped, turned. Her eyes were red, her voice shaking between anger and shame. "I didn't have to make it this way," she said. "Neither did I replied softly. There was a pause. The kind that feels like both a goodbye and a beginning. "Love without respect becomes control," I said. "One day, you'll understand that." Then I turned and walked away. Mr. Richards walked beside me to the car. "You could have asked for damages, you know," he said. "False claim, emotional distress, you'd win easily." I shook my head. "The point was never to win, Richard. The point was to remind her who she's fighting." He nodded, smiling faintly. "You remind me of the old craftsman, the kind who'd rather fix the foundation than paint over the cracks." I smiled. That's the only way a house stands. That night, I went home. Not to Maple Valley, not to the house that built me, but to a quiet apartment overlooking Lake Union, the same lake where everything began. I poured a cup of coffee, sat by the window, and watched the reflections of city lights ripple across the dark water. For the first time in years, the silence felt gentle. Logos. No noise. Just peace. I thought about Amelia, about the little girl with paint on her hands and stars on her ceiling. And I whispered to no one, I hope you find your way back. A week later, Mr. Richards called. They've dropped the appeal, he said. Seems they don't have the stomach for another round. Good, I said. Maybe now they'll start building their own house. He chuckled. You still sound like a builder. Always will. I kept living quietly after that. Mornings began with black coffee and the sound of gulls. Evenings ended with sawdust and wood glue. I volunteered at a local community center, teaching young carpenters how to measure twice and cut once. Sometimes, I'd see fathers and daughters working side by side, laughing, arguing, learning. And I'd feel that familiar ache. Not regret, just remembrance. One afternoon, I caught myself sketching again. A new house, smaller this time. Simpler. Not for anyone else. Just for me. And for the first time in a long while, I realized I wasn't building walls anymore. I was building peace. The days that followed the hearing moved like fog over water, slow, heavy, without direction. I spent my mornings by the window, coffee in hand, watching the city wake beneath a grey sky. The lake shimmered below, calm and unbothered, as if it had long stopped caring about the noise of people. It had been a month since I'd stood in court, since I'd looked my daughter in the eye and seen the child I raised vanish behind a stranger's fear. The silence between us had grown into something tangible, like an extra wall in the room. But that silence, I realized, was the peace I had built. After decades of noise, construction sites, hammer strikes, life, silence finally had a sound I could live with. In the evenings, I walked along Lake Union, the same path where families strolled with laughter that echoed across the water. I often stopped by the small pier where boats rocked gently in their moorings. From there, I could see the faint outline of the restaurant where everything had begun, the birthday, the whisper, the betrayal. Some nights, I thought about calling Amelia. Other nights, I didn't. Not out of anger, but because words felt too small for the distance between us. The truth was, I missed her. Not the woman she'd become, but the girl who once waited for me on the porch, holding lemonade in a chipped mug. One Sunday afternoon, I received a knock at the door. When I opened it, a young delivery boy stood there, holding a small envelope. For Mr. Harlan, he said, reading the name twice to be sure. I took it and signed. The handwriting on the front was familiar, careful, round letters, the kind that pause before every curve. Amelia. My first instinct was to leave it unopened, to protect the quiet I had built for myself. But curiosity, that old enemy of peace, whispered louder. I sat down by the window, slit the envelope open, and unfolded the letter. The paper smelled faintly of perfume and regret. The handwriting trembled in places, like the words had been written through tears. Dad. I don't know how to start this, so I'll start with the truth. I'm sorry. When you sold the house, I thought you were losing yourself. I thought I was saving you. But now I see, I was saving something else. Mark's pressure, our debts, the fear of losing what we didn't even own, it twisted my thinking. I told myself I was being practical. But really, I was being selfish. You built that house with your hands. I built walls with my pride. When I saw you in court, standing there steady, calm, like the house you built, I realized how wrong I was. I wasn't trying to protect you. I was trying to control you, just like Mark wanted. He's gone now. We separated last week. He said I'd changed, and maybe I did. Maybe I finally saw what love isn't. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I remember everything, the smell of sawdust, the sound of your hammer, the way you used to hum when you worked. I remember the blue walls, and the stars you painted for me. You said once that true love is about letting go. Maybe that's what I'm doing now. If you ever want to see me again, I'll be at the old house this Sunday. The new owners said I could visit. I want to say goodbye to Mom's tree, and maybe to the part of myself that forgot what you taught me. Love, always. Amelia. I read the letter twice, slowly, carefully, tracing every shaky line of ink with my thumb. Outside, the lake glimmered, soft gold in the late afternoon light. The kind of light that forgives. Part of me wanted to throw the letter away. The other part, the part that still remembered her laughter echoing through empty frames, knew I would go. Sunday came wrapped in rain. The kind that doesn't fall in drops, but in whispers. The drive to Maple Valley was long and silent. The closer I got, the more the memories returned. The smell of wet pine, the sound of gravel under tires, the way the house had looked the first time I saw it, a promise rising out of mud. When I turned onto the old road, I slowed down. The land had changed. Coffee shops had replaced the forest. Houses gleamed with glass and chrome. But my old house, our house, still stood, smaller than I remembered, but stubborn. A young couple was in the yard, the new owners. They waved when they saw me, smiling warmly. Beside the old maple tree stood Amelia, an umbrella in her hand, her hair tied back like she used to wear it in college. She looked older, but softer, like someone who had finally stopped running. For a moment, I didn't move. I just watched her, the way I used to when she played in the garden as a child, dancing in puddles while the rain fell harder. When she noticed me, she smiled. Not the polite, practiced smile I'd seen at the restaurant, but a real one. Small, trembling, but real. "Hi, Dad," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "Söthert." We stood there, under the rain, letting silence do the talking. Then she handed me something. A small wooden frame, weathered at the edges. "I found this inside," she said. "The new owners kept it in the attic. Thought you might want it back." Inside the frame was a photo of us. Me holding her at age 5, her hair wild, both of us covered in paint and sawdust. Behind us, the house half-built, sunlight streaming through the beams. I held the photo in my hands, my throat tightening. "You kept this?" I asked. "I kept everything," she whispered. We walked to the maple tree together. The bark was darker now, but the carving was still there. 2 initials, E+M, etched deep into the wood. "She loved this tree," Amelia said. "We both did," I answered. "She said it would outlive us all." "Maybe it will," she said softly. For a long time, we just stood there. A father and daughter, drenched but unbroken. The rain fell like an apology that neither of us needed to speak. Finally, she said, "I don't know how to make things right." "You don't have to," I said. "You just have to start." She nodded slowly. "Can we start with coffee?" I smiled. "Black, 2 sugars. You still remember?" "Always." We sat on the porch steps. The same ones I once built in a single day because she wanted stairs that sounded like music. They still creaked, the same tune. We didn't talk much. She told me about the kids, how they missed me, how she'd moved out of Mark's house and was living with a friend for now, how she wanted to learn carpentry, not professionally, just enough to fix things herself. "You think you can teach me?" she asked. "You think you can learn from an old man?" I teased. She laughed, that same high, bell-clear sound that had once filled the house. "I already have," she said softly. "I just forgot for a while." When the rain stopped, the sky opened wide and golden. Sunlight streamed through the clouds, hitting the lake beyond the yard. The reflection shimmered, blinding and beautiful. Amelia stood and took a deep breath. "She'd be proud of you, you know," she said. "Your mother?" I asked. "Both of them, Mom and the house." I chuckled. "You always did talk to wood like it was alive." "Maybe it is," she said, smiling. "Everything you build carries a heartbeat." Before I left, she hugged me. A long, trembling hug that felt like something rebuilding itself one brick at a time. No words. Just warmth. "I'll come visit soon," she whispered. "You don't have to," I said. "I know," she replied. "That's why I will." That night, back in my apartment, I placed the framed photo on my desk. The city lights flickered outside, reflecting in the glass. The picture looked alive again, like time had folded in on itself. I opened my window. The air smelled like rain and sawdust. I closed my eyes, hearing the echo of a little girl's laughter in the wind. "You can rebuild, Amelia," I whispered to the night. "Start with your word. And with your heart." And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel old. I just felt finished, not like a man at the end, but like a craftsman stepping back from a job done right. Back home, I placed the little birdhouse on my windowsill. A sparrow found it within a week. She built her nest inside, tiny sticks arranged with impossible care. Every morning, I'd hear her wings fluttering, the sound of life rebuilding itself. The city kept moving. The lake kept shining. And for the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't waiting for anything. Everything that needed to be said had been built, not spoken. As the months passed, my hands began to ache more. The doctor said to slow down, to let the young ones carry the heavy beams. So I did, gladly. I watched them work, correct, improve. One afternoon, Malik brought me a wooden plaque he had carved himself. "For you," he said, embarrassed. "So you don't forget us." The plaque read, "The house that built me, and the man who taught us how." I laughed, though my throat tightened. "You spelled measure wrong," I said. "Yeah," he grinned, "but you taught me to learn from the mistake, not the anger." I smiled. Then I guess I did my job. In late autumn, Amelia and Theo came to pick me up for a trip. We drove out to Maple Valley. The Whitakers had invited us to visit the old house again. It looked different. New paint, new garden, a swing under the tree. But when I walked through the door, I could still feel her mother's laughter echoing faintly in the walls. Amelia placed her hand on the doorframe, tracing the marks of her childhood height. Theo looked up, curious. "Is that you, Mom?" "Yes," she smiled. "Every year, Grandpa would mark how much I'd grown. Can you mark me too?" I took the pencil from my pocket. Yes, I still carry one, and made a small line above his head. "There," I said. "Now the house remembers you too." He giggled, running to look. Amelia slipped her arm around me, resting her head on my shoulder. "You see, Dad," she whispered. "The house is still standing." "So are we," I said. That evening, as the sun sank behind the trees, we sat beneath the maple. The carving, E+M, was faint now, but still there. A lifetime later, it had survived wind, rain, and time. I ran my fingers across it and smiled. "You were right," I whispered to my late wife. "It did outlive us." Amelia watched me quietly. "What did you say?" "Just talking to your mother," I said softly, telling her we finally learned how to let go. As we drove back, the sky turned violet. The lights from the lake glimmered again in the distance, the same lake where my story had begun and now ended. Amelia hummed a tune from her childhood, a song her mother used to sing while we worked in the yard. Theo fell asleep in the back seat, his small hand clutching the birdhouse. I looked out at the road ahead, feeling the calm that comes not from getting revenge, but from reclaiming peace. Because revenge, I realized, isn't about destruction. It's about restoration, of dignity, of self, of truth. That night, I returned home, opened the window, and breathed in the cool air. The moon shimmered on the lake's surface. For a moment, I could almost see all of them there. Amelia as a child, her mother laughing, the ghosts of who we were. But they weren't ghosts anymore. They were memories, finished, framed, forgiven. I picked up my pencil and drew one final line in my sketchbook. A small house under a wide sky, with one open door. Below it, I wrote, "The strongest walls are not built to keep others out, but to remind us what we stand for within." Then I closed the book, set it aside, and let the night settle. The lake was calm. The city slept. And somewhere across the water, the wind carried the faint sound of hammers. Someone, somewhere, building their own peace.